Welcome, everybody, to the sixth installment of MarshWatch. We're going to be covering all kinds of diving ducks today, so that's pretty exciting. There's going to be no amphibians, just diving ducks. Before we get started, I'd just like to say that I am joining you today from Saskatoon. We're located on Treaty 6 territory, which encompasses the homelands of the Cree, Nakota, Dakota, Saulteaux, and Stoney First Nations, as well as the homeland of the Métis people. My name is Leanne Latchamoy, in case this is your first time tuning in, and I have the pleasure of working for an organization called Birds Canada. We're a national not-for-profit, and our mission is to drive action to increase the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of birds in Canada. And as you can see by this montage of photos, I love wetlands. They're some of my favorite places to be, especially this time of year when all of the migrants are returning and water just attracts all of that exciting life. So it's been really exciting to see what's returning in the last week or so. Migration has really, had a big push here. So it's very exciting to see. Today, we are going to cover bird and not amphibian. I thought I forgot to change that one, but we're just going to be doing some bird ID today, and that's going to be recorded and posted online for your later viewing pleasure. We're also going to have a quiz and discussion at the end. That's not going to be recorded, so don't worry. Feel free to ask any of your questions. Okay, we are going to be covering several ducks today, and they're all going to be diving ducks. We've got Canvasback, Redhead, Ringneck Duck, Lesser Scaup, Ruddy Duck, and Bufflehead. And sneak peek as a bonus, I tossed in a little bit about the greater Scaup, which we're seeing migrating through at the same time as the lesser Scaup, but they tend to hang out farther north than most of our viewers. So without further ado, what are we talking about when we're talking about diving ducks again? We've brought this up a few times. We've got dabbling ducks, which tend to feed at the water's surface, and they're really good at walking around on land. The counterpart to that is the ducks that feed underwater. These guys are specialized at getting underwater and getting food, whether that be plant material or, fish, crustaceans, all kinds of things. So these birds primarily, feed underwater. Of course, they eat stuff at the surface if it's, readily available, but a lot of them, their primary mode of food gathering is by diving under the water, and that's a really useful behavior clue. And the ducks are often divided into the dabbling ducks and the diving ducks. The diving ducks are definitely made for, life underwater. They've got their feet placed farther back on their body, and that's, to help with propulsion. It's a lot easier if you have those, little feet fins farther back on your body. It's just more efficient propulsion. That also makes them really awkward on land. So these aren't the kind of ducks that you're going to be seeing like waddling around in a park or in a field or anything. They're going to be hanging out pretty close to the water's edge. They'll get out of the water, of course, but they're not going to be, going for a big long stroll. They also have smaller wing size compared to their bodies. And because, their wings are slightly reduced compared to their body size, they have a harder time getting airborne. So as you can see in the bottom image here, we've got a couple of canvasbacks who are flapping their wings, and they need to, run with their little legs on top of the water while they're flapping in order to get airborne. So you can think of it like a plane taking off. A plane doesn't just, take off like a helicopter, right? It needs to, gain speed on the ground and slowly gain liftoff. It's the same thing for the diving ducks. They don't have as broad a wing, and so the wing loading is such that they need to, really get going and, take a little runway and fly up. That also, makes them have to fly with faster wing beats, and that's the sort of thing that you might notice if you've spent a lot of time watching ducks. And so maybe you can, pay attention to that, just seeing the ducks fly by. The ones that have like really fast wing beats, those are going to be your diving ducks because those wings are not as broad. Um, like I've mentioned before, the dabbling ducks, these guys have much broader wings and they can shoot straight up from land. These guys, the diving ducks, cannot take off from land. They need to get up onto the water and start their little runway thing. It is pretty adorable once you get to see it. Okay, we mentioned the canvasback already, so why not start with the canvasback? This is a really, really elegant duck. So it is one of two that has a red head, and don't worry if you've ever been confused in your field guide about, oh gosh, there's two ducks that look pretty similar and both of them have a red head. I'll show you some tricks to tell these two apart. So the canvasback is going to be pretty large overall, and the key feature here is going to be the head shape. It's got a really gentle sloping forehead and bill. You can imagine if you're a little skier, you're going to be maybe having an easier time going down this nice gentle slope. It's not going to have a steep forehead like we'll see in the redhead a little bit later. So that head shape is really distinct, and you can see, like, even the bird at a distance, and you're hardly getting anything in terms of color. That head shape is really going to help you out. There isn't another duck that has, or at least in the wetlands in southern Canada, that has quite this head shape and slope to it. So overall, kind of has this really rusty reddish head, dark breast, and the body is bright white. And I want you to imagine, make the association in your head, canvasback. It really does have this bright white canvas, and that's going to be helpful when telling it apart from the redhead. The redhead's going to have a gray body. And as we've mentioned before, you know, especially if you're in low light situations, white on anything is going to stand out like a sore thumb. And especially this canvasback has this gorgeous all white sides and all white back. And you can see in this photo down here, it's kind of blurry. It's a little bit far. The lighting's not the greatest. This is more often how you see a lot of ducks. And so you can see that this bird, even at a distance, that whole body just glows bright white. And, if you haven't picked up on that clue before, next time you see a canvasback, it is really shocking how bright white that body is. So bright white body, dark breast, dark rump, but really, really bright white, and that sloping head. The wing patterns, they're not nearly as exciting or remarkable as they are in the dabbling ducks. The dabbling ducks often have this brightly colored patch on the secondaries called the speculum. You don't really have that so much going on with the diving ducks. That's not to say that wing pattern can't be a useful clue, but for a lot of them, it's just kind of plain. So here we have in the canvasback drake, it's just going to be kind of a continuation of the body colors, mostly whitish for the most part. If you get a look at the eye, it's this gorgeous bright red iris, but of course that doesn't stand out at a great distance. So let's take a look at the hen. And she's, a fair bit more plain, as we've seen with all of the ducks. And all of the divers also, they have much more plain plumage. They're not nearly as variegated and mottled as the dabbling hens. These guys, they nest either really close to the water or over the water. So they're not necessarily trying to blend in with grasses. They're more trying to, just be dark and nondescript near the edge of the wetland. So the canvasback hen, she's going to have that same gorgeous sloped forehead, really, really nice head shape. It's a large duck. And once you learn this head shape, this is going to be your ticket to identifying, the canvasback hen. So really get used to that, like, really sloped, gentle forehead. She's going to have a nice dark black bill. And overall, she's going to have warm brown colors on her body, a bit of a faint eye ring going on, pale on the throat patch here, and she's going to have a nice dark eye. Otherwise, her wing is not terribly exciting. It's really the shape that's going to, tell you that she's a canvasback. And I promise you, it's going to look obvious when you've got other birds hanging around. Especially in a lot of these southern wetlands, there isn't anything that's going to have quite that same head shape as the canvasback. They're an omnivorous diver. They're going to be eating all kinds of aquatic plant material, from seeds and buds, leaves, rhizomes, tubers. They'll also eat insects and larvae, and they'll eat snails as well. They are a diving duck, and these ones definitely prefer deeper water marshes, small lakes, and sheltered bays. Quite a handsome duck. I think they're probably my favorite diving duck. They're just so gorgeous. Even with, the drake's head tucked in here, you can still get that lovely, gentle, sloping head. Overall, sound is going to be less important for helping you identify the diving ducks. Most of the time, they're fairly silent. Sometimes you'll hear them. So we're just going to cover the sound more as a interesting tidbit and not as I want you to write this to memory. So the canvasback drake makes this kind of woo noise. See, it's a neat little sound. I've heard it a few times, but it's definitely not something that, you hear a lot of diving ducks making a ton of noise. So, do have a listen, especially early in the breeding season when they're trying to impress all of the females. This is going to be a bird that you're more likely to see in Western Canada, and as you get up north of 60, up in Alaska and the Northwest Territories and the Yukon. So you can see them a little bit back east, but if you want to get real good looks, you're going to have to come out west and give the prairies a visit. It's a great time, I promise you. Okay. Now, the redhead. This is the one that I was mentioning was similar. And, the first time I came out to do bird work on the prairies, I was coming to do marsh work. And I remember looking in my book going, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? These two ducks have red heads, and I couldn't wrap my head around the differences. But there is a fair bit of differences. So the head shape you'll notice is going to be much, much steeper. If you're imagining yourself as a little tiny skier on the top of this bird's head, that is a scary pitch. That's going to be, not an easy thing to ski down. So much, much steeper forehead. And that body, it's really, really finely barred black and white, and that blends into this grayish tone. So the body isn't going to glow that bright white like it is in the canvasback. So the body is going to be more, dull gray. It's still going to be lighter. It's still going to have a dark rump and a dark breast, but that center, portion of the bird, the flanks and the back, they're going to look gray at a distance. The bill is another giveaway. The bill is going to be this kind of pale blue color in the drake with this nice dark tip with a little bit of like white shadowing around the dark tip of it. So, you know, quite a bit different looking in terms of head structure. It really doesn't have that gentle slope. It definitely have this nice steep forehead. And again, that body color is going to be that gray. It's really not going to, light up at a distance. So that's going to be your clue here. If you can, you can get a look at the eye. It's definitely a lot more yellow than the blood red of the canvasback, but it's really handsome little duck. And again, the wings are not the most exciting on the diving species. So quite a handsome bird. Still that kind of, rusty red head, but bear in mind that that whole body, that flank area is all going to appear gray at a distance. And if you can remember those two, that canvas back, that white as a canvas, that's going to be a good, memory tool for you. The hens, of course, are going to be, a bit more drab overall. She's still going to retain that head shape, not going to be as gentle sloping as the canvasback. It's going to be kind of this warm brownish overall, a little bit of a pale base to the bill, pale eye-ring with a little bit of shadow behind it, just a little, kind of disconnected, little itty bitty bit of shadow on the side of her head. Can have a dark bill, and the tip is going to be slightly darker. That's going to echo a bit of the drake's, pale blue with a darker tip, but overall she's going to be having, a much, much darker tip. Dark eye in this hen. That'll be important when we bring in some Scaup, but overall she's pretty plain. So bear in mind you're going to be looking for just little subtleties on the face. So looking for a bit of a pale eye ring and a pale base of the bill and an overall dark looking eye. So that is our redhead hen. Overall, they're a pretty omnivorous diver. They're going to be eating a lot of aquatic plant material, so seeds, buds, leaves, rhizomes, tubers, sounds familiar, insects, larvae, and snails. So really anything that's under the water. It's kind of a hilarious photo on the bottom here with this redhead drake just stuffing his face with a bunch of aquatic plants. So, you know, really, really nice, gorgeous little species here. They're a wetland generalist. You're going to find them in all sorts of wetlands, not necessarily only the deep ones. They can do a little bit of slightly shallower wetlands, but still enough for them to dive down and get some food. So I'm going to listen to the call here. It definitely does more of a woo. I don't know, it almost sounds like a kid's toy or something, like not quite like a kazoo, but something similar to that. Okay. And the redhead, going to be having a fairly broad distribution. And if you're tuning in from further out east, you're actually, likely to encounter some of these birds as well. So keep an eye out for the lovely redhead. Okay, let's compare those two side by side, shall we? So we've got our largish diving ducks with red heads. That body is going to be bright white like a canvas on the canvasback, and it's going to be gray in the redhead. And let's say they're far enough away, or you're looking at the hens, that head shape is really going to be helpful. So nice, gentle, sloping forehead for the canvasback. Really kind of a unique head shape. If you're, confused between, oh no, I've got two, redheaded species here, take a look at that, that forehead slope is going to be definitely much more scooped out in the redhead and much more flat in the canvasback. Again, that bright white body color versus the gray body color of the redhead. Hopefully, this demystifies these two redheaded ducks for you if you ever had them confused, because I know I sure did. And here's a great example. This is from the Macaulay Library at Cornell. And this is just a picture of, pretty terrible lighting. It's obviously taken at a fair distance away. It's kind of blurry, but you can still make out, we've got redheads, all of these darker ones here. These are nice little redheads. And then we've got the canvas back sticking out with that, nice sloping bill shape and that bright white body. And this is just kind of to illustrate again that point that, white really, really does stand out. And when you have a lot of it, especially on something like a canvas back, it's incredibly stark in contrast to the, sometimes very gray water and potentially, gray looking ducks. So that white is really a good key there. Okay, let's bring in the lesser scaup. This is a medium-sized diving duck, and it kind of reminds me of an Oreo cookie. It's a lot of black and white, black on the front end, black on the back end, and there's some white in the middle. Um, the back is going to be this variegated, black and white barring. It's kind of like a zigzaggy pattern. And what that does is at a distance, it really looks gray. You would really only see the pattern if you were, nice and up close. For the most part, when you're going to be seeing these guys are going to be at a fair distance, and that those zigzaggy black and white lines, they're all going to look fairly, gray at a distance, but that's still going to contrast with that bright white side here. So, think Oreo cookie, black on the front end, black on the back end, and, in the center is some paler stuff. And the Drake, the bill is going to be, black. Oh my goodness. Sorry, I will restart that. In the Drake, the bill is going to be blue with a black little nail at the tip. Um, it really stands out quite a fair bit. They've got a nice yellow eye on them, and the head has some really nice iridescence. Now, often it tends to be in that kind of bluish purple hues, but it can also look green depending on, the lighting conditions and where you are at relative to the bird itself. Um, so well, we're going to compare the lesser scaup in a second here to the greater scaup, but just know that the extent of the white on the wing for both the drakes and the hens is going to be probably the easiest way to tell these two species apart. So on the lesser scaup, the white is going to be restricted to those secondary feathers. So that's what I'm circling right here with my mouse. Those are the secondary feathers. These primaries, they're not going to have that bright white coloration. They're just going to look kind of a dull grayish. In the greater scaup, there's going to be much more white in the wings, but we'll go over that in a little bit here as a kind of bonus bird. The hens, on the other hand, they're really kind of this, gray brown or this chocolate brown, and they're really quite drab overall. Their eye still has that kind of yellow brownish, and they just look a little bit deranged to me. That's probably one of the easiest ways to tell them for me is that, it's this brown bird with this yellow brown eye, and it does, they kind of look just a little bit deranged. I don't know how better to say it. So they do have whitish at the base of the bill, and this is quite variable, depending on the individual. So you can see a few here on the bottom, they have a little bit more extensive white. In the non-breeding season, they actually have really extensive white at the base of the bill, but during the breeding season, when they're going to be, nesting, they're going to be in that kind of more eclipse type plumage, and they're going to be losing that white. So just kind of a bit of a paleness. Otherwise, their bill is quite this dark gray color. Um, and yeah, they're just a pretty drab overall. The wing pattern is identical, so it's only going to be white restricted to the secondaries on the wing and none of it on the primary feathers. But that is our lesser Scaup hen. Overall, pretty dark, pretty plain looking bird. They're definitely, an invertebrate specialist when they're diving. So they're going to be going underwater looking for insects, larvae, crustaceans, mollusks. They'll eat some plant parts and seeds, but definitely they tend to focus on, more of the invertebrates. We'll compare to greater Scaup in a second here, but lesser Scaup, they'll be breeding on wetlands, lakes, rivers, anything with emergent vegetation. They're mostly silent, but they do make a little woo woo noise. Okay. So this is the lesser Scaup. So if you want to see them, in the breeding season, this is another one where you're going to have to, be lucky enough to be living out, in on the prairies or further out west. But you'll definitely catch them on migration. And on migration, they're going to be having that, bright base of the bill for the most part. Okay, now on to the bonus round. Greater and lesser Scaup. So greater Scaup, they nest much farther north, and so generally speaking, across much of southern Canada, we're only seeing greater Scaup for a short amount of time on migration. They're here now in Saskatchewan. I saw some last week, and they were mixed in with the graders and lessers all together. Now, this is by no means an easy distinction to make between greater and lesser, especially if they're sitting on the water. Both are very similar. They both have that Oreo cookie look to them. They've got some barring on the back, which looks gray at a distance. And sometimes you'll see in guides that, we're looking at greater Scaup having more of a greenish tinge to the head and the lesser more of a purplish, but this it's a pretty unreliable character. Both can show green and both can show purple depending on the way the light is hitting and the way, you're looking at the bird relative to how the light is. All of those iridescent and refractory colors are really light dependent and direction dependent. So just bear that in mind, that if you see the green or if you see the purple, it's not a dead giveaway. One of the best things for telling the two apart while they're on the water, we're going to be looking at head shape, and this is best done when the ducks are at rest, not when they're actively feeding, because as the bird's moving around, it's going to be doing different things with its head position and feathers. But as they're kind of just chilling, loafing around in the water, not terribly active, you can use the the peak of the head as your identification. So in the greater Scaup, the highest point on the head is going to be closer to the bill, whereas on the lesser Scaup, it's going to be farther back. And this can be really tricky, and it's not always going to be possible to identify them. It might be handy if they're side by side. The greater is going to be a little bit larger. I think they're about 200 grams heavier, or about half a pound heavier than the lesser, but it's one of those differences that it's so small, unless they're right next to each other, you're probably going to have a very hard time, you know, oh yes, this is the bigger one, because trust me, if it's by itself, using the size difference isn't helpful. Only if they're side by side, and even then, some of their postures might be deceiving and giving that away. So really, the where the peak, the tallest part of the head is, it's kind of on the back half of the head on the lesser Scaup, and on the greater Scaup, the peak is closer to the bill end. However, if you do get to see them up close, there can be a bit more dark and coarser barring on the back of the lesser Scaup than on the greater. Again, that's kind of tough. But if you see them in flight, this is where it is going to be far easier because the extent of the white differs between the two. So in the greater Scaup, the white is going to, be covering the secondary feathers, but it's also going to trail onto the primaries. And this is going to be true for the drakes and the hens. We can see this. We've got a hen here of the greater Scaup, and the secondaries are going to be white in the lesser Scaup, and we're going to have none of that white trailing on to the primary feathers. So if you happen to get, a decent look at these guys flying, that's probably going to be the easiest way. And that's, for me, definitely one of the easier ways. They'll often, as they're getting, I don't know, ready to get going or just stretching their wings, they will do this while they're on the water as well. They'll stretch out and flap their wings, and you might get a good look at them there. But it's definitely not the easiest thing. And so if you want to just call them all Scaup and not identify them to species during the migratory periods, no one's going to fault you. It is not an easy distinction to make. And here's just the example of the greater Scaup. There's a couple of pockets of, where they might stick around during the breeding season in the south, but by and large, they're up much farther north across, all of North America. They're also in Europe and Asia as well, in the same kind of northern habitats. So keep that in mind. Greater Scaup is, likely to be seen on spring and fall migration, probably best told apart by their wings and the extent of white they're in. Phew! Okay, now that we've got those two confusing birds out of the way, we're going to bring up another bird that looks a little bit similar but has a couple of key differences. So, at first look, you might be going, oh gosh, this is another one that looks like the Scaup. And while you're right, the thing we're going to be paying attention to here that's easiest to see, that solid black back. It was nice and gray and barred in our Scaup. It's going to be totally jet black in the ringneck duck. And you might be wondering why it's called a ringneck duck. It probably shouldn't be called the ringneck duck because there is a little ring around the neck. This is only visible when the bird has its neck extended and only in the right lighting circumstances. This ring sort of has this kind of rusty reddish look to it, and it's really one of those things where it's a case of somebody named this bird while they had a dead specimen in hand and didn't actually see the bird or going around in nature, because you almost never see that ringneck. I've seen the ringneck a handful of times. For the most part, you're going to be taking a look at this lovely black back, and they also have this really bright white ring around the bill. So it's going to be a dark bill tipped with black with a nice white ring, and it's also going to have, bright white at the base of it. So overall, very much like a Scaup, dark in the front, dark in the back. The flanks are going to be this dark gray, and there is a bit of a whitish spur that kind of fades in from, those gray flanks. Overall, the wing's going to be dark above, and there's going to be a little bit of kind of this grayish white color along the wing. But that dark jet black back is going to be, one of your keys for identifying it compared to any of the Scaup species. We're going to be finding ringneck ducks in shallow wetlands and in the boreal forest in lots of fens and bogs. They also have this kind of orange-yellow eye as well. I think they're a pretty handsome little misnamed duck. The hen, on the other hand, she can be a little bit variable, and she's still, for the most part, going to show that dark bill with the white ring. In the midst of the breeding season, that white ring is going to fade a little bit. It's going to be less, prominent, but it's still going to be there. I'll show you that in the next photo here. Overall, she's going to be kind of reddish brown. Some of them are more brown, some of them are a bit more reddish overall, but generally the back is going to be darker than the rest of the flanks, and that kind of harkens back to the drake where he's got that nice jet black back. She's going to have a nice little white eye ring and another pale base of the bill. And her eye is going to be, brown. It's not going to be that shocking kind of deranged look of the lesser Scaup with that pale eye on it. Okay, so this is really, an opportunistic generalist. They are a diving species, but they will dabble as well. So, they do hang out in sometimes rather shallow wetlands. So they're a little bit more adaptable than some of the divers that really have a preference for going deep underwater. So they'll happily eat seeds, tubers, other plant matter, insects, leeches, snails, and things like clams. So they'll dive a fair bit, but they'll also, do a little bit of tipping up and eating at the water surface as well. Here's another picture showing that kind of reddish, purplish ring around the neck, but it's really, not the most visible feature in terms of having named a bird after it. But again, we're going to be, keeping an eye out for that really nice jet black back. That's really gonna, it's to me, it's the thing that always stands out the most, especially when you're looking at, you get that search image of like, okay, we got a black and white duck. What is the body, what does the back look like? And if it's got a black back, you're looking at your lovely ring neck duck. And you can see the hen here, she's in eclipse plumage in this photo, and it's just a fainter white ring, but it is still there. And this is a species that we've got across much of Canada, in the southern portions where most of us are living and taking a look at birds. Okay, let's take a look at our larger brown diving hens. So first off, we've got the canvasback, and the canvasback has that really unique head shape. She's got this, lovely, gentle slope. Think if you're skiing, you might, have an easier time on this little bunny hill versus the much steeper foreheads of the redhead and the lesser Scaup. All of these birds are kind of in this plain brownish coloration. The canvasback and the redhead both have a bit of a pale eye ring. The redhead's going to have a little bit of a shadow at the base of the bill. And the canvasback and redhead are going to have these dark eyes, where our lesser Scaup hen is really going to have this kind of orangey, yellow, brownish looking eye. And she can have a bit of pale at the base of the bill as well. And that is, just variable between the females. But overall, all of them have, brown coloration and dark bills. So it is going to take a little bit of time to get practice with the larger, diving hens. They're a little bit tricky because they're all generally kind of plain. I'll bring in the ringneck duck, just to compare to the other large ones. So she's going to have this nice white ring around the end of her bill, and that's really going to help, have her stand out from the other diving hens. Sometimes, the other ducks, their backs are a little bit dark as well, so it can be a little bit tough. Sometimes, we're looking at the ringneck duck. She often has a darker back than the flanks, but that can be a little bit subtle, and that can take a bit of practice to get a look at. But for the ringneck duck, the ring bill is really going to be helpful here. Okay, now we got two more smaller diving ducks, and one of them is the Ruddy Duck. This is a very small, compact little diving duck. They have a stiff tail that is often held up in the air, not always, but fairly regularly they're going to be having that tail stuck straight up. And much more so in the drakes than the hens. Overall, this is a very rusty colored bird. That bright white cheek patch is really going to stand out, and they just have the craziest powder blue bill. Like, it is such, I hope everybody gets the chance to see this bird in their lives, because that blue is just kind of surreal. It looks fake. It's really an incredible color. So, that blue little bill stuck on this tiny little bird with this, stiff tail, this bright white cheek patch. They're just really, really handsome, very cute. Their wings are just dark and drab overall in the drakes and the hen. And the drake's going to have this nice black cap that kind of blends nicely into his rusty brownish body. So very handsome, compact little duck. The hen is obviously more drab, and she's going to have a little bit of that kind of dark cap and this, dark line under the eye. And you can kind of think like, maybe like a football player has those dark lines under their eyes. So you can think about her, she's small, compact, a little bit like a football and has that kind of linebacker markings on the side of her cheek. Also has a stiff tail, but doesn't tend to, go around with it like cocked straight up like the Drake does, because obviously he's trying to, impress the ladies and, defend his little turf. But the hen also does have a similar, short, stiff little tail. And again, that nice pale little cheek. Unfortunately, she doesn't have the powder blue bill, but it's still a cute, tiny little bill. These guys, do a lot of diving. They seek invertebrates, so insects, their larvae, crustaceans, zooplankton, and small amounts of plant matter and seeds. And if you get to see them, they're going to be, starting to do this now as they're getting onto breeding territories. The males do this hilarious bubbling display where they'll, make this noise and they will press their bill onto their breasts and I'm not sure if they're expelling, you know, air that's trapped in between their feathers to make all of these little bubbles, but it is a hilarious little display. I highly recommend that you Google the Ruddy Duck bubbling display after this to take a look at the videos. It is absolutely priceless, and I just couldn't help but show a picture of the cute little duckling there. So here's a sound of the bubbling display. It's quite unique. So they're a very, very cute little duck. The prairie potholes actually are a really important breeding ground for this duck, and they contain about 86% of the population of Ruddy ducks. So you can see them in other parts, but I remember when I was, doing a lot of birding and stuff in Montreal and Southern Ontario, Ruddy ducks were always really exciting to see. So they're much, much more common out here in the prairie pothole region. Very handsome little birds. And last but certainly not least is the adorable Bufflehead. This is a very small little diving duck. It's got a tiny, short, stubby little bill. Like it is just really, really tiny compared to the rest of the rest of the bird's head. The drake is really gorgeous. So this white kind of patch on the back of the head is quite stark and it stands out like a sore thumb at a distance. The rest of its head is black and covered in iridescent feathers, and if you get them in the right lighting, it's incredible. It's like a rainbow, or an oil slick sounds bad, but you know what I mean. With a little bit of an oil slick, it has that kind of iridescent shininess to it. It's very, very similar on the Bufflehead head. It's just incredible if you get them in the right light. More often than not, they tend to look fairly dark, so you don't always get that beautiful, sheen on their heads. But if you happen to be, in just the right lighting and seeing the bird up close, you can get a look at that sheen. Otherwise, it's kind of interesting. They're dark above, kind of, and that dark kind of floats on this, bright white band around kind of the breast and the flanks and even on the rump. So it's kind of an interesting, and almost, you can imagine it looks like a little bird sitting on a iceberg or something. It's a very cute little bird. Both the drakes and the hens have a little bit of white on their wings, but again, it's going to be, the bufflehead's going to be remarkable enough that you should see it. And that little white patch on the back of the head is really, it stands out, and there isn't anything else that's going to be like it. They're quite active little birds. They dive really, really frequently, and it's often really hard to count how many bufflehead are out in a group. Sometimes they'll hang out, in deeper water, and you'll be looking, go, okay, I think there's like 2 or 3 buffleheads. Suddenly there's 8, and then there's 2, and then there's 3. It's just they're really, really active, and they can stay underwater for quite a while. The hens are quite cute as well. They have that same kind of, short, compact, stubby look. They've got that tiny little bill, and they've got just this little white patch kind of below and behind the eye on this otherwise pretty drab, gray looking bird. The upper parts are darker than kind of the flanks and breast and sides. So harkens again back to that Drake where he's got the black above and the white below. She's got darker gray and lighter gray below, of course, being less, showy. What's interesting about Bufflehead is they're actually a cavity nesting species, and they prefer the cavities, created by northern flickers. They happen to be just the right size. So you'll have Bufflehead nest in areas that you have, trees available that have these cavities built by these woodpeckers. So, in certain parts of the prairies where, it's really sparse in terms of trees, sometimes you'll see bufflehead and sometimes, you'll have the drake summering there. But, in terms of breeding and nesting grounds, they need to have, a nesting cavity within walking distance. And, I forget, I did look it up at one point, but, they can go quite a ways, like over a kilometer in terms of walking. I think they generally prefer their trees to be closer to their ponds, but they will, nest in those cavities. The young jump out and, bounce on the ground. It's a good thing the little ones are made mostly of jelly, it seems. And the mom, calls and leads them off to the pond that she's chosen. So pretty neat little nesting behavior. A lot of the other species, they all nest in and around wetlands, but the bufflehead is definitely one of those odd ducks in terms of, preferring to nest in a tree cavity. It's not the only one. There's a few other species, but this is really the only one that's very common on wetlands. Overall, they're definitely going to be an invertebrate seeker. So they're going to be after insects and larvae, crustaceans, mollusks, and they'll eat the odd seed, but overall, they're definitely going for a bit more of that animal matter. So you'll find them on ponds and small lakes near trees. And, sometimes even a dugout works for, especially a drake spending the summer somewhere. You'll find them on little dugouts. Um, they're quite a handsome little bird. You can see the sheen looks different depending on, the light and the angle that you're seeing the bird. So here, it looks all green, whereas it looks a fair bit more purple. So it's just that iridescent color is just such an interesting, phenomenon, I think. I think it's super, super neat. So Bufflehead, very cute, very small, very active, and that, bright white patch on the back of the drake's head is just beautiful and it stands out at quite a distance. And this is another species that we're going to be seeing a fair bit of across, a lot of North America, and some areas more scarce than others, but oftentimes we'll see a lot of these birds on migration in various places. Okay, so comparing our two small dark diving hens, the Ruddy Duck, she's going to have the, that football, line below her eyes across that pale cheek. They both have little tails, but the Ruddy Duck, she's going to be a little bit more likely to hold it up. The Bufflehead hen is going to have that little white patch kind of below and behind the eye, this little kind of white oval. She's got a much smaller, itty bittier little bill. The Ruddy Ducks, it's definitely a wetland species. You're going to find them in areas where you have, deep water, cattails, and bulrushes. The Bufflehead definitely can do, small wooded ponds, even ones a little bit away from trees, but definitely needs some tree cavities in the vicinity for their nests. So those are those two little small dark diving hens compared. Ruddy duck tends to be a bit more on that rusty reddish colored, and the bufflehead much more cool gray looking. And those were our birds for today. We did the canvasback, redhead, ringneck duck, lesser scaup, and bonus greater scaup, ruddy duck, and bufflehead. And I can just go back and compare all of these hens again. Overall, they're not going to be those kind of mottled and variegated colors like we've been seeing with the dabbling ducks. Instead, they're much more, plain brown. There isn't as much intricacy in all of the patterns of their feathers. So we're going to be looking at a lot of, structure of the bird, especially, the canvasback, that nice sloping head, or small, compact little diving ducks like our ruddy duck and the bufflehead hens. And again, we're going to be honing in on those facial details. Lesser Scaup, she's going to have that, eye that's kind of this pale yellow color, and I think makes them kind of looked a little bit deranged. All of the other hens all have nice dark eyes, so that can be a nice clue for you if you get to see the lesser Scaup hen, if you see that little, paler looking eye. So those were our hens today, and I just want to thank you for tuning in. If you want to reach out to me, you can reach me at skatlas@birdscanada.org. You can, visit the MarshWatch website where we have all of the quizzes up. They're different than the ones we do at the end of these webinars, so go ahead and do them, but don't feel pressure to do it like a test. Some of the best ways to learn is by, picking up your oops, does it show? Picking up your field guide and doing the quiz along with your field guide. Because if you're out in nature, hopefully you're going to be going out with some sort of resource along with you. So, do the test with the resource that you have so that you can, compare to it and do a bit of learning that way. So I never want the quizzes to be, feel like they're pressured. They're more as a learning tool for you to try to learn and get a little bit better. You can connect with Birds Canada online at birdscanada.org or on all of the social media. We are a national not-for-profit, so if you're in a position to make a donation, that's always greatly appreciated. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to our MarshWatch supporters who make this program possible. We've got the Manitoba Fish and Wildlife Enhancement Fund, the Government of Canada, Saskatchewan Ministry of Environment's Fish and Wildlife Development Fund, Sask Power, and Wildlife Habitat Canada. And thank you to you, the audience, who, make it possible for me to do this. I really enjoy doing it. And I hope you, find the diving hens a little bit less mystifying.